Good afternoon, everyone. Damage still being assessed from the grain growing areas of the United States, still inundated with floodwaters. Now the storage facilities are the main focus. What's underwater? What has to be destroyed? This news article making the rounds, spooking an enormous amount of people, indicating that up to 6 billion bushels of our grains could be submerged and have to be destroyed because everywhere you look, storage facility after storage facility is inundated. Corn prices only jumped 1% so far, but now when they're really delving into it, they're finding storage bags torn, bins burst open, swelling, washed away grains. So now history is our crystal ball for the future. Midwest floods 1993. Great Missouri flood. This is down near St. Louis. You can see the swelling in the rivers. This is in Nebraska. We see the same thing. But this time, 15 bridges washed away. And if we do look back at 1993, corn prices jumped by 30+%, as well as wheat doing the same. Spring flood outlook from NOAA. We're going to have to match that up with the grain growing areas in the U.S. And if we're using 30% off of maize prices, that means that December call should be $488. This is by no means financial advice. And please remember to visit the sponsors for today's video, My Patriot Supply, long-term food storage. Remember, every purchase you make helps keep Adapt 2030 on air and independent, as well as TrueLeafMarket.com, heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet. The links are below in the description box, and both of these can help you get more prepared for the changes of the grand solar minimum. This video is about a comparison between the 1993 flood and the way it drove up crop pricing during the 12 months after the flooding. We'll see which flood is more severe, but what you're looking at right here is pretty much 7 states experiencing the same exact conditions where the wheat and corn is grown across the United States in the grow belts. Here's some Iowa farmers talking about 2011. We had the once-in-a-500-year flood, Noah's Ark, and now here we are 8 years later, right back at square one. And in the image there, the storage bins are the main focus of this whole video, is how much grain was stored, how much was lost, and how much your food is going to increase over the next 12 months. Now, speaking of the once-in-a-500-year storm, as we progress deeper into the grand solar minimum, as you can see, the solar activity forecast declines right now. So these storm intensification events, if you will, are going to get stronger every year. So the once-in-a-500-year, once-in-a-400-year storm will be the normal as we get out to 2023. Interesting article over here on New York Times assessing the flood damage as well. They did their own tour driving about 1,000 miles. But notice this image as well. Another storage facility completely submerged. Now, anytime water touches the grain, it's considered adulterated. They have to destroy the entire bin. You can't scrape off the top half and try to sell it in the market. If that bin or that storage facility or whatever it is that's holding the grain has water in it, it must be destroyed. And wherever you look across so many states, it is the exact same imagery again. Whether they're inland storage or riverside, it doesn't matter. This is a mega flood. Which brings us over here to Michael Schneider's site, The End of the American Dream. Article making the rounds right now. Catastrophic flooding in the Midwest could last for months, and that's going to mean a dramatic drop in U.S. food production. Now, with the trade war going on, there's so much grain stored in America. In these 7 states, currently they're looking at least 6.7 billion bushels of corn, soy, and wheat stored. 38% of all the total U.S. supplies available at that time. So keep that number in mind, 6.7 billion. But as we look through these 7 states here, all that's been shown are these same images of inland deltas and inland seas from this massive once-in-a-500-year flood. Yet again, grain storage facilities, farms. The planting season is definitely going to be delayed this year. And in so many places, they're not even going to be able to plant. So we can put a 0 production yield on so many millions of acres as well. Now, Ag Canada coming out, talking about as farmers are going through when the floodwaters are receding slightly, they're finding storage bags torn, bins burst open from swelling, grains washed away, as well as the cattle, farm machinery, roads, infrastructure, and everything else that keeps this whole supply chain moving. And you notice the last sentence there, there's so much grain stored because the U.S. trade war. So I had a few of my subscribers write in and say, hey, check out the 1993 floods. The great Midwest flood, that is, from 1993. I thought I will do exactly that and see if we can get an indication of how much our food price will rise based on the same flood events. But this time it's more intense, in my opinion. Great Missouri flood of 1993. This is near St. Louis, Missouri. You can see how much the rivers had swollen pre and then post flood. 30 billion in damage. But when we move up here to Nebraska, we see the same things, the rivers swelling and the before and after photos. But this is way further north up in the watershed flowing into the Mississippi. And also inland deltas being formed, much like the Okavango Delta in southern Africa. Landsat images here side by side, before flood, after flood. Now, the reason I think that this event is more intense than the 1993 flood is 21 new record crests alone just on this map in Nebraska. But when you start going around places like Iowa and Missouri, you start to get all these other record crests that are happening that did not happen in the 93 flood. These storage bins here, they look like they've been elevated, but it's hard to tell if there's any water seepage. See, here's the thing. Even if it was contaminated on the bottom, and let's say the bottom 3 feet got flooded or the bottom 5 feet, even though that thing's over 100 feet tall, the entire bin needs to be destroyed due to the U.S. laws. They're not allowed to go in and scrape the top 90 feet off. That's still dry, unadulterated on the top of those bins. So now it just comes down to waiting and seeing how much flood damage there truly is and how much has been inundated in what is stored. Also, this time a difference in the 93 flood, 15 bridges in Nebraska washed away as dams were overtopped and these tidal waves and tsunamis of water rolled downstream some 2 miles wide, ripping across interstate bridges, toppling 4-lane highways, actually gouging them out, washing out 4-lane highway interstate bridges. This is a small beginning of the list. Everything's linked in the description box below. I hope you do your own research. Everything discussed in tonight's video will link out to the original source as well as to my advertisers, my Patriot Supply and TrueLeafMarket.com. When you see images like this, cattle being fed in a foot deep of water, you know absolutely the planting season will be affected this year because of this event. The Great Flood of 1993, 30,000 square miles. Now what's interesting already, they're putting it this total and they haven't even gotten all the aerial surveys and all the real information back because that water flow that came out of, say, Nebraska is still making its way down the Mississippi, if it has even gotten there yet. But as we get through these side tributaries that are flooding, the Mississippi is absolutely going to flood. That is where the major grain storage facilities are. Now hopefully they would have built levees and protection walls around this, but you can see how many levees were overtopped during this event. So taking it back to 1993, record Midwest floods, and then 12 months after the flood, how much corn prices rose. So it was about a 30% rise, roughly, and we find the same thing in wheat. And I'm only targeting the first 12 months after this flood event. So now what we have to do is add in the spring flood outlook. And on the bottom left, we have corn, and this is where the grow zone is in the United States. The top right, we have where the winter wheat is produced. And then on the bottom right, we have the spring wheat cultivation areas of the U.S. This comes off NOAA, and this is the forecast out for the spring flood. Now, we're really focusing on the purple and the red. That yellow can be discounted. I think it's more of a scare factor there myself, personally. But we're going to start to match up these maps on where the already occurred major, catastrophic, epic, all-time flooding has been, with the moderate, which is still massive flooding. So I'm going to take you over here, 24 right in the middle. I know your eye went there first. That is Kansas. Now we need to come over to the right where we can see the Mississippi River, right under number 3 where it says Iowa, number 3. You follow that whole basin down, you see a lot of production there right along the Mississippi. That's all going to be taken offline. Now, a little bit over in Kansas, Oklahoma, they might benefit because last year they were in a drought, so this extra rain is going to benefit in some areas, but part of northern Kansas is going to go offline as well. Now, speaking of Kansas, amber waves of pain. This comes from 2018. Kansas with a 100-year low in planting after record October rainfall and early snowfalls. Now we have record rains and late season planting in the exact same areas. And a glimpse here to what the article referenced: second greatest snowfall on record for the month of November. New snow record totals being set in Kansas City. These are the types of things that are happening as the intensification of the grand solar minimum rolls on year upon year. This is what we need to talk about, and I just can't get it yet why the mainstream media does not want to discuss these issues. On to spring wheat, getting up into Minnesota and the Dakotas up here. But when we overlay that, this major catastrophic flooding has just wiped out at least at the minimum 25% of all the spring wheat. That is not going to get planted on time, and the fields are below normal temperature, and they're also still incredibly wet. So spring wheat in the United States down. Taking a look at corn. Now, when we look at the numbers here, number 18 is Nebraska, 17 being Iowa. Now, these are where the major floods are happening now anyway. And you got the governors of these states talking about from their helicopter view, it's an inland sea. How do you think crop production and planting is going to go there? So overlaying the flood maps again, it looks at least 50% of the corn's going offline. Could they get a late plant in with GMO? Possible. What happens if it does the same thing where you get the early frosts, the early snows? Not going to get a crop out. Now, another caveat and thing that did not happen in the 1993 floods was because of the grain dispute and the trade war with China, an enormous amount of stockpiles were being held in the silos and bins locally on farms, as well as the facilities, and then secondary facilities as well, just regular warehouses. So now, referencing off of Michael Schneider's article as well, that 6.7 billion bushels of stored grain in the flood zones in those 7 states, they're looking at so far preliminary estimates of almost all of that's flooded. So take a look at the USDA report on stored grains. Soybeans, 3.7 billion bushels, corn, 11.9 billion bushels, and then wheat just at 2 billion bushels. So if you add up that 3.7, the 11.9, and the 2, you come out to 17.6 billion bushels throughout the United States. But then we need to subtract 6.7 billion bushels. Literally a third of all the grain stored in America has just been lost. So not only is it lost in price driving, but the places they're going to plant to try to make up for the losses, to refill the bins, if you will, for this year, it's just not going to happen. It's going to come in so low on the yield because of the non-planting of these millions of acres already forecast, of zero production for millions of prime acres, as well as just a decreased yields due to poor conditions for growing. So that leaves a total of 10.9 billion bushels. Article off Reuters, grain markets walled off from flood impacts by mountains of supplies. True, but once the assessment comes in and they know exactly how much is lost, this is where the increase in futures prices will come, in my opinion. This is not financial advice, nor is the rest of the video as we go through pricing. It's just an indication of looking at what happened in the 93 flood. Can we gauge to see what food prices might be moving forward? Also, another caveat in here, global grain production is down 3%, but then it was down 4% prior year as well. So we're looking at a 7% decline globally in the grains over the last 2 years. And now we lost all this grain, and it's going to be more difficult to grow new grain. So prices might move a little more than expected. So far, futures prices on corn up 1%. We take a look at the futures market here off the CME group for delivery month. I'm using 30% as what had happened in the 1993 floods for corn and wheat. So if we're using 30% and we're taking out the initial May pricing call at the prior settle at 376, when it comes down to the December 2019 call, that 400 should be around 488. Again, that's not financial advice, just my own assessment based on the 1993 pricing moving forward. Now there's a few other things happening at this time, so I think that these prices based on 30% might even be a little low. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. Please remember to visit our sponsors for this video, My Patriot Supply, long-term food storage, water filtration, dehydrators for food, and everything you need to get prepared for the grand solar minimum, and TrueLeafMarket.com, heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet, because right now is the planting season, and you can grow food, which will be a necessity moving forward. As you're already seeing, global agriculture is going to be affected. You're going to have to start becoming more self-reliant. And if you're looking for more analysis on the grand solar minimum and how it's starting to affect our societies and economy, many Ice Age Conversations podcast anywhere, podcast are hosted across the net, as well as Brighteon, the free speech community, brighteon.com/channel/adapt2030, and a list of social media links for Adapt 2030.